see my,
okay.
you can see my screen, right?
Cool.
The front page. Great.
Yep. Looks good. Let's wait 1 more minute and we'll get started. Okay, well, for the sake of time, let's get started. Good morning, everyone. We are CINet Junior Scientist Council. Thanks for joining our pop-up webinar series. I am very pleased to introduce our speaker for today's webinar, Tingyu Hou. She's a PhD candidate at Purdue University. She's also one of our event organization chairs. So she's normally who's been helping organize the webinar. But today is very special. She will be the speaker presenting her great work about erosion and mobilization controls on soil organic geochemistry, form and flux in intensively managed agricultural landscapes. Okay, can you?
All right. Okay. Thank you, Joe, for the nice introduction. I'm really honored to be here. I wanted to really show up like during the seminars throughout the previous semester because I'm teaching at the same time. But yeah, I'm really happy to be here and talk about the research I was doing for the past few years. I'm currently a PhD candidate at the Purdue University and at the final stage. And in fact, I have my defense schedule next week. So today's talk is also a preview of my PhD work. And I will highlight some of the work related to the erosion and the mobilization controls on the soil organic geochemistry, form and flux within the intensively managed agricultural landscape with a perspective from hillslope to stream. Before anything, I want just to acknowledge that so many people actually in this room have contributed to this work, and it has been truly an honor to be involved in a project like the IML, where we have like so many people working in the same site but from different disciplines. I gained like a lot from this like multi-collaboration work, and thank you very much. I wanted to start with just kind of the underlying ideas that were really drawing me into this specific research. On a broad scale, agriculture management takes up 40% of the Earth's land surface, and along with other land uses, it contributes about 20 to 25% of greenhouse gas emission globally. To offset that, there are strategies out there that requires increasing the amount of land-based carbon, as the global soils are the largest pool that store carbon. So the example of 4 per 1,000 initiative proposed at the climate summit in 2015 state that if the carbon level increased by 0.4% per year and the top 30 to 40 centimeter of the soil, the annual increase of the CO2 in the atmosphere will be significantly reduced. Although scientists might debate on the feasibility of reaching this actual value every year, but it has raised interest in the researchers on soil organic carbon and its dynamics, especially in the agriculture setting, which put in the into the context of my work. So here is being recently published a paper showing a significant A-horizon soil loss in the Corn Belt in Midwest United States due to the severe land degradation, mainly erosion of the organic surface soils. Depending on how much carbon and normally active rich organic carbon concentrated in this top layer, that could translate to a significant loss of soil carbon and potentially been mineralized and released back to the atmosphere. A lot of my work deals with the organic carbon and what controls the organic carbon stay in soil and its dynamics. There are multiple variables like this physicochemical controls as well as the biological control that would interact with each other at different temporal and spatial scale and make it impossible or at least very difficult to directly assess these complex interaction among these controls and how they influence the dynamic perspective, the carbon in soil. However, the carbon stored in soil can be viewed with a much simpler perspective, simply as the differences between the carbon input and carbon output. And this is actually a fundamental formula for many of the soil carbon models considered a dynamic perspective. But still, till today, the scientists are still debating about the erosional induced net carbon exchange between the land and atmosphere. And the estimate range from -1 to +1 pg carbon per year. And they questioning about its role as either carbon sink or source. This debate hasn't settled yet, and the supporters from both sides agreed on one thing. So there are lack of credible data regarding the fate of the eroded organic carbon at different erosional stages, which could consider a major cause of these uncertainties in estimation. And therefore, the fate of organic carbon that's subject to erosion must be assessed at different erosional stage, which should not just be focused on the initial loss and erosion setting or the last stage where the deposition and the burial happen in depressional or aquatic sites, but it should also include the dynamic detachment / the transport and redistribution over the landscape. And this is actually where my work's fitting. And my work is a small portion in the IML CDO project, the intensively managed landscape, the critical zone observatory funded by NSF. And it's also part of the broader CDO network across the United States. And my work focused in this Clear Creek watershed in Iowa. It's really a small watershed, only drained about 270 square kilometers. And what unique about the IML compared to other CZ sciences studied ecosystem services from the bedrock all the way to the canopy would be the anthropogenic impacts. The human activity play a controlling role in this type of landscape, that altering the dynamic heterogeneity across the landscape, as well as the fluxes of water, carbon, soil, nutrients. Therefore, I'm just going to use the overall hypothesis of IML-CZ work, which is the system has been converted from a transformer landscape with highly productivity, high storage capacity for both water, soil, as well as nutrients, and it converted to a transporter landscape where it continues losing soil, water, and associated nutrient sediment due to the change in the land use from minimum disturbed system to intensively managed agriculture system, and also the massive artificial drainage modifications on this land. So today the land is still considered as high productivity, but this is mainly boosted by the utilization of chemical fertilizer. And the figure from our collaborator, SONOS published in 2015, demonstrate a very good example of this spatial heterogeneity in this tillage-induced agricultural landscape, where we have these multiple erosive processes occurred in the same landscape, interplay with the land management that result in this micro topographic relief, and there are gonna be oriented surface roughness in the flux of particles, and the different patterns of the plant or the depositional area that could store sediment and carbon. And overall, it also demonstrates to one particular character in agriculture setting, that we're losing soil armor as the surface plant coverage for almost half of the year when it's not growing crop. And which bring back the topic of the how carbon gonna stay in soil. Carbon is gonna not sitting in soil solely, rather with primary and secondary minerals along with the plant and the faunal debrides, they're gonna form this aggregation structure with micro aggregates growing inside of macro aggregates, resulting in this complex structure that protect organic carbon with different oxidation state from the microbial decomposition. Hence, it will sequestrate carbon in soil. It's going to stabilize. But this aggregation is highly variable to external stress, especially in agriculture setting where the soil is being disturbed normally twice a year by tillage. Then think about how it's going to react if the raindrop hits the aggregates. It's going to dispatch with different fragment that contains the organic carbon with different degradation state. So it may release or expose organic carbon that been previously preserved within the structure to the microbial decomposition. And now it's really bringing my work. As I'm showing here with a conceptual diagram, how the material normally distribute and mobilize from Hillslope all the way to offset export into the stream. The agriculture or the intensively managed agriculture intensify each step of these erosive processes. And if you guys still remember when I talk about the scientists that voted for both sink and source, they have recognized the importance of the fate of these eroded organic carbon during these stepped processes. Well, I don't disagree with them, but I also thought there were another story to be told, because the fate of eroded organic carbon, they normally trying to assess or estimate it, is still considered as the long-term, I mean, compared to these episodic erosive events that usually happen within hours and days. So what if these short-term, low-frequency events induce the processes deliver and distribute organic carbon with different geochemical characteristics, which means the potential starting fate of these eroded organic carbon going to be different as they spread out across the landscape. So this has led to the overall guiding question for my PhD work. Does the soil act as a geochemical filter across the landscape, like in the agriculture setting, at each step of the transport? And if so, is this reflected in timing or the chemical signature of organic carbon that export from hillslope to stream? And therefore, the overall of my PhD work gonna be separated to investigate this erosive process at the dissected segment from the hill slope all the way to the stream. And the investigation on these eroded organic carbon actually require different scales. For example, to learn the organic carbon detached from the aggregate structure, we're really looking at the soil particle or the aggregate scales, and as they be detached from the and it will be transported and redistributed across a land hill slope, and then once there's enough transferring energy to deliver this material to the stream work, will enlarge our perspective to the watershed scale to learn the export to the stream and rivers of these fluvial organic carbon. So the questions that leading each of the experiment I'm asking is quite simple. It's just if we can see chemical signature of the detached or mobilized or exported carbon compare where they started. And I'm gonna revisit this diagram pretty often, just to get everyone on the same page as we move from step to step. And this is just some basic geochemical analysis. I continuously used in most of my work the isotopic abundance and in the stable isotope of carbon and nitrogen. So for people that are not familiar with this term, it's basically a relative abundance of the heavier stable isotope. Here they see C13 over the major carbon isotope, the C12. In the case of nitrogen, that would be nitrogen 15 over nitrogen 14, and that normalized to international standards. And that could provide as a source indicator, especially in agriculture setting, we have distinct C4 crop and of corns growing on the land surface over the old C3 grassy and forest. And that's due to different photosynthesis pathways. I'm not going to delve into that, but this not only provide the perspective from the plant source, but also vertically. Think about the modern agriculture bringing more C4 or enriched signal at surface versus the very depleted old carbon from the C3 soil that buried it with depth. And the second major approach I used is the lignin extraction method that represent the aromatic biopolymers derived from a plant that stays in soil. Although with the studies developed till today, the lignin doesn't going to be recognized as a recalcitrant component in soil, but it still provides a good indicator of plant-derived aromatic structure. And I specifically use the decay proxy, which represent I want to introduce a little bit more on this different phenol groups. So the overall complex structure of the lignin, I think I'm showing here was an example of a pine tree. And it could be breakdown into different monomers that could group into three major groups: the syringol, the vanillin, and the cinnamol. And normally we sum up together to calculate extractable lignin content from a certain soil. And within the vanillin or syringol groups, there is a proxy used as the decay to represent the decay rate, decay state. That's the aldehyde, the acid versus the aldehyde ratio. And the studies have been reported that if the ratio gets higher, meaning the carbon has been processed through the microbial degradation with a higher rate, so represent higher oxidate degrade. And that's being continuously used in my work to represent the oxidate degradation of the organic carbon in soil. And like I said, we're going to revisit this diagram pretty often. So the first step of the erosion would be the organic carbon detached from largely protective structure. And to evaluate the chemical differences between the detached fragment versus their stable structure, we sampled the different size agriculture from the different hill slopes positions across the landscape. And these bulk aggregate structure with different size, the large and the small, were well preserved. So it maintained its aggregate structure before we use the artificial rainfall simulation. And the reason we use this simulated raindrop is to control the kinetic energy that provided by this raindroplet. Therefore, so we put the aggregates on top of the sieve and then let the raindrop hit it, and it's gonna break out. And the detached parts that gonna liberate through the sieves, and we collect the bone structure, and they use the geochemical approaches I just talked about earlier to evaluate the chemical fractionations. And here, the reason we choose these two size aggregates is because they're most responsive to the agricultural tillage and the mechanical breakdown from the rainfall. And also the particles within this size range are important in terms of the forming new micro and macro aggregate structures. And I'm gonna not delve into the detailed result, but based on our results, we generate this conceptual model. This chart, this chart is showing the proportion of the stable structure at the lower part with the darker shades, and compare that to the released or liberated fragment portion at the top. So as the tillage intensity increase, the soil aggregates losing its ability to withstand the raindrop. Hence, it detached more organic fragment that could potentially leading to microbial degradation. On top of that, on these lines actually showing the chemical fractionations between the detached fragment compared to their stable structures. So I'm not really showing a number because that's going to differ depending on the soil type and the locations across the landscape. But basically, we're showing the detached fragment compared to their stable structure. Increased in terms of the lignin oxidation that's derived from the decay proxy with acid to aldehyde ratio, and also enriched in N15, represent more microbially processed, but the depleted in terms of the total organic carbon content and nitrogen content, as also the plant source biopolymers, which represent the sum of the extracted lignin monomers. So this is telling us that tillage intensity increased both proportion and also enhanced the geochemical fractionations between the detached organic fragment compared to their stable structure. That's the take-home message. Then moving back to the diagram, after the fragment particles be detached from its stable structure, it's subject to the entrainment and the carried away with the overland flow if there's enough energy. That's why the second experiment we set up is to study the at Hillslope scale how the erosion induced mobilization of the organic particles. And we're simulating, still using the artificial reinforced simulation to provide controlled kinetic energy. We simulate the erosion-induced mobilization of organic particles with a focus on the oriented roughness generated by the ridge tillage practices. So as one of the conservative tillage practice, ridge tillage has been introduced in the local region in Clear Creek or the entire Midwest around the 1990s. And its original goal is to provide a drier and warmer seabed by elevating the soil above the land surface with a less disturbance of the till depth. So normal till depth is 5 centimeters compared to conventional tillage around 20 centimeters. But the studies have also shown the ability of this practice to minimize the soil erosion when the principal orientation of these furrows is perpendicular to the slope, where they can trap and store water. And therefore, this practice have modified the runoff pattern that could either facilitate or counteract the effect of this downhill hydrological force. So we conducted a reinforced simulation experiment on one representative hill slope on the long-term row crop management with ridge tillage. Comparing the plots where tillage-induced oriented roughness is characterized by principally either parallel or perpendicular to the surface flow direction. And we collect mobilized particles and separate them with different sizes and use similar approaches I described to evaluate the chemical fractionations. Here's some key findings, and we also integrate our findings into a conceptual model. So this would refer to initial condition of a particle organic carbon association as the aggregates. This looks a little bit different than the previous slides, but you got the idea. And we have a legend bar here showing the relative oxidase state of within this aggregation that's based on our results from lignin biomarkers, the decay proxy of acid to aldehyde ratio. And here, when we first look at the parallel organic carbon fluxes, the organic carbon fluxes at the parallel orientation site, we conclude with the chemical analysis that the parallel orientation deliver the organic rich sediment through this energy accelerated environment as n mass transport. So basically it moves everything in a large amount, but the chemical, it chemically resemble their source. If we move to the perpendicular site, look at the scale drop by 1 order of magnitude. So it significantly reduced the amount of carbon. However, they separate the chemical fractionations between the different size groups. Here we're showing more small size dense that we recognize as the mineral associated organic carbon. And there are another group of larger size, but similarly as free particular organic matter being delivered through this sort of a sorting processes. And the contour tillage happened here is actually increase the deposition of the soil particles within the spherules and increase the release of these finer or lighter organic rich material through the overspilling and the contour bridging. There's some take-home messages of the role of orientation from the contour tillage induced roughness to run off the direction has a 30-fold impact on the eroded organic carbon flux. And the perpendicular orientation generated by this tilled induced roughness enhance the chemical fractionation of mobilized organic particles. And still getting back, we're one step to the stream. Therefore, if we have enough carrying energy that deliver these material, surface material all the way to streams, things get a little bit more complicated as there are different forms of fluvial organic carbon, both dissolved or particulate. It could come with different transport pathways under different mechanisms. So most normally the dissolved portion travels with water, whilst the export of particulate organic carbon is normally associated with surface erosive processes. So for this particular study, the rationale of this study was that the storms are responsible for the majority flux of the fluvial organic carbon from their terrestrial source area into the fluvial network over a relatively short period of time. And this study present a high resolution sampling on the concentration and the stable isotope composition of DOC as well as POC that export through this nested subwatershed and Clear Creek watershed. And there are previous work done by Blair's group and June investigate the perspective from the POC dynamics and has published recently. And so my work is actually leveraged from their work to introduce the DOC and compare the different responses of DOC and POC. And zooming to the headwater where the agriculture dominated, we have intensive sampling of the stream water accompanied by different potential sources that could from the erosion of soil at the stream bank. We have a soil course and right at the stream bank sampled as one potential source, as well as some subsurface flow systems, groundwater from wells, as well as the tile drain water from the tile ditches and these headwater to study the sort of the source, contributing sources and transport pathway shifting of these exported organic carbon during different flow events. And I can't help to bring up the development of the C13 and NI system on the dissolved organic carbon part, because that actually take significant amount of my PhD time, and I spent almost like 2 years for the development of this new instrumentation system. And I work extensively with our lab manager and the company that provide the instrumentation. So we sort of like a perfect system to be able to analyze with the high accuracy and the precision on the low DOC concentration water samples, normally from natural stream waters. And with a like enormous test, we'll be able to provide a clean and concentrated CO2 beam to the air mass, just to to summarize in short. And right now, this system have the advantage of requiring less water sample volume. We only use 4 mils per sample, as well as low labor and time consuming. Just a little brag about this because that's sort of like one milestone during my trajectory of the PhD. Just bring back to the export organic carbon in the stream. So in this study, we sampled the 6 different storm events that occurred during this 2 hydraulic year period and mirrored the particular and dissolved organic carbon concentration as well as the event export. Like I said, the POC part was done and published by Neil's group. This is just one example of the temporal variation of DOC and POC concentrations happened in the October 2015. And I want to highlight that we were also surprised to see there are not many studies that reported at the storm event scale with both particular and organic dissolved form of organic carbon that's export from the catchment or the watershed. I think because of the labor required to have this high resolution temporal resolution measurements, but with this scale, we actually, like here, I'm showing the integrated dissolved organic carbon flux versus the particular organic fluxes, and we want to highlight the with this one-to-one line as a reference here, the dominant role of the POC during this short-term high flow periods. And this was not normally observed with either weekly or monthly seasonal sampling strategy from various studies that's been showing showing the organic carbon export. So there's a surface-induced processes dominate this POC export during the high flow period, whereas overall POC accounted for 54 to 94% of the total fluvial export in our study. Some other studies have been shown the POC accounted over 70 to 80% of the annual export, but within only 10 to 20% of the time. And with limited data point, we can really extrapolate our data to annual export contribution, but we got the ideas of this, the importance of POC export with the storm event scales. And this is just something that I recently found and very interesting. I would like to show this. So this is a weekly normalized difference vegetation index I extract from the USDA website, and the time stamp relate to individual events that's either happened during or right before the event, and it's showing a very like a clear transition from a bare soil. If I read the legend that the greenish represent the more dense vegetation coverage, and the if it's get to brownish is more exposed soil surface. And with the help of the weekly crop reported by the Iowa Field Office, we have identified each of the events fall into specific crop growing seasons. So the overall low is this following overall low NDVI from a high NDVI that's from during or post harvest time. to crop emergence that still limited the surface canopy because the seeds start to emerge at this time. And then through the vegetative growth stage and the reproductive growth stage, that basically you have near to full coverage of the plant vegetation on the land surface. And what we find interesting is to normalize this spatial distribution of NDVI based upon the individual subsurface drainage area to get a mean value. And we plot that against the event DOC flux for individual events that happened across all 3 stations. And what we normally thought would be it's going to have a linear relationship because from event 5 post-harvest all the way to the reproduction growth stage, the increase in surface vegetation or the crop going to generate more DOC along with POC as a more below ground production at the rhizosphere. But also the increase in surface canopy might impede the aggregate breakdown by the raindrop. So it covers like what I described, the soil armor. They cover the soil surface. We didn't see the like sort of obvious trend with POC, assuming we have limited data point or it's just not that sensitive to this indicator. But we see a very interesting trend with the dissolved organic carbon. It started to increase from event 5 to event 3 and it peak at the event 3. And this, it seems to have reached to a threshold when it suddenly dropped to lower DOC export values above this 0.8 of NDVI. And then I start to think about what control this part of the DOC export, as I assume there are going to be enough or a massive supply of DOC during this stage. So I look at the event precipitation for each individual storm events and not really see a obvious pattern, but then I add up with accumulated this precipitation that happened within 14 days prior to the events, and to the major events happened within showing a range from 70 to 80 something millimeter in terms of the total wetness in the watershed. But the event 7 showed over twice amount of precipitation input within this 2 weeks of the during this event. And I start to think about this might show a transfer from supply limitation to flow limitation on this way, as during these stages of growing season, there are going to be a significant amount of water uptake by the plant. And as these seasons also happen during the summer, it's going to get hot and have higher evapotranspiration rate too. Yeah, but we haven't, since the manuscript is still in progress, so we haven't concluded yet, but I thought it would be really interesting to bring this up and bring up more discussion on this. But yeah, the last piece of the for this study I want to show is the C13, the stable isotope composition of the streams. So this is one example event, the same one I showed earlier with a temporal variation of DOC concentration and the POC concentration. Here I show the stable isotope composition of my DOC and compare with what Blair have published on the POC part. And I normalized this chart on the x-axis, I normalize discharge based on the subwatershed basin area, because it's gonna be good to lay all the events throughout all the stations at the same scale. And this is how the South Savannah. Sorry, I don't have the legend. I don't know why. I forgot that. This is sort of the hysteresis pattern of the sea searching over the discharge in South Savannah. And as Blair previously identified the sequence of input from a depleted algae source in the stream, and the enriched signal from the surface agriculture soil, and then a complex the sources from the bank erosion. We see the DOC share the similar sources as they share the similar patterns. And when we move to the middle ridge of the watershed, where it's gonna still be dominated by the agriculture, but the local area really have more that the prairie and the forest concentrated within. The POC is still showing a clockwise pattern, but the DOC start to respond to sort of differently, as the arrows following from the rising limb to the fallen limb is quite similar until the later part of the fallen limb it start to have to receiving enriched signal, probably due to a late response from the upland source. And as it move to the mouth of the watershed, here's the patterns start to show similar as a counterwise pattern. So there's a local sources dominate at first, and then the delayed arrival of upland agriculture source. And we just want to bring up the different responses of the DOC and the POC regarding to different sources and the transport pathways that could shifting throughout this different event. And we have this similar plots or these hysteresis patterns for the other events where we also sampled for the dissolved organic carbon, but I'm not gonna delve into that too. But the overall discussion on the results from my work, and come back to the guiding question: does the soil erosion act as a geochemical filter across agriculture landscape like IML? The short answer is yes. And we have evidence showing distinctive geochemical filtering as a function of storm-induced hydraulic interplay with the tillage intensity, the oriented roughness generated by different tillage practices, and also the shifting across the agriculture management cycle. And I think I am reaching my time, sort of. Yeah, with that being said, I'm really thank you for your attention, and also welcome to the questions and discussions.
Thank you, Tingyu. This was a great presentation. Are there any questions or comments from the audience?
Could I ask something?
Yeah.
Anyway, great job, Tingyu, and the vegetation part of it, where you're looking at the differences in vegetation, that's brilliant. I really like the way that is looking. what I'm wondering is if you can combine that, and you were getting there, maybe this is in your plan, is not looking at simply precipitation, but looking at PQ ratios. In other words, precipitation to discharge. Because what I think you'll find is for those last two storm events in the sequence in June, July, that you're going to find that the discharge is low, really low for the precipitation you get, for the reasons you stated, transpiration. But that's actually a way to quantify that. And that would be another vector on your plot, would be to look at PQ or QP, if maybe might be better, discharge precipitation relationship, since we have the discharge measurements, obviously.
Yeah. I don't know, like I have one plot I didn't really show here, but it's the, I think it's the QP relationship, the QP ratio that fall like perfectly linear with the DOC flux. And we have like discussions about like, is there embedded correlation that happens that generate that? But overall, I think the QP relationship actually represent watershed characteristics, like sort of the drainage capacity of watershed at a given time. So I think that actually, yeah, that actually might leading us to something if there's not no like embedded relationship between the DOC and that ratio. But
does DOC increase with Q over P or decrease? Which way is the line go?
Increase.
It increases the higher the discharge?
The higher the Q over P ratio.
Huh, okay. That's kind of counterintuitive to me, but okay.
But I'm not using the like the export, the integrated export, but I also normalize that to the period of the events, the overall time we're monitoring the events. So it's sort of like reflect of fluxes. So it's like kilogram carbon per square meter, per square kilometer per hour. Yeah. And that sort of fit the best, but yeah, we could have more discussion on that.
Yeah, I think that part of your interpretation data set is going to be really valuable for linking the mirrors experiments with the landscape modeling to the export, because that's, where's the DOC coming from, but mostly from the root zone, I assume. And so what the water is doing at that time is really key.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, if there aren't more questions, thanks again, Tingyu, for the nice talk. And thanks everyone for your participation. And I'll see you in the next webinar. Thank you. Have a great weekend.
Hold on. Whoever is the host, can you transfer the host privileges to me and stop recording? We're going to have a little conversation here. Whoever is able to do. So if you don't know what it is about, you can drop off. Okay, I'm going to stop.